Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again this evening to the airwaves of Salam Media. It is Wednesday night in the Wednesday night edition of Talk with Inayat Wadi. Our panel discussions is we normally host on a Wednesday evening. So wherever you are, whatever platform you're listening to us, we welcome you to the show, our listeners, our viewers on YouTube and all the other social media platforms, right across the network. So wonderful that you're able to join us. And once again, looking forward to a very insightful discussion. And this is exactly what Salam Media is doing. And our focus tonight is going to be largely on Palestine. Looking at Palestine from a number of perspectives and angles as well. We will be unpacking China's role in trying to or attempting to reconcile the two Palestinian factions. What does this actually mean for the Palestinian struggle? We know the question of unity within the Palestinian factions, Fatah and Hamas, has come up over and over again. And to a large extent, it has impacted on the Palestinian cause. So we will touch base on that. We're also taking a look at the United States with Joe Biden out of the equation. Kamala Harris, now there are groups that are talking about or who believe that she will alter Middle East policy. Well, that is left to be seen because pretty controversial herself on the whole question of Palestine and Israel, and obviously very, very supportive of Israel. So we would try and get some of that out of the way as well. Also taking a look at a local dynamics as far as Palestine is concerned. Ronald Lamola, the new Minister of International Affairs, what is his position? Is he going to adopt the same position as Dr. Naledi Pandor? And we've seen the Zionist Federation making a statement that he may be soft to appease the United States of America, and also taking a look at those who have volunteered to serve on the IDF. So quite a mixed bag, but all of this global dynamics that relate to Palestine, and we have quite an esteemed panel. And part of the panel we've got Fazlin Fransman-Taliep, who is the Director of Research, Kijami Research, Dr. Farhin Delawala, MRN researcher, and also Paul Hendler, anti-Zionist Jewish South African, writing about Zionism and antisemitism, active in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in Cape Town. So on screen right now, right on top, Paul Hendler, welcome to the show. Wonderful you're able to join us, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and greetings to the other two panelists and also to your viewers.
And also to you, Dr. Farhin Delawala. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome.
Walaikum salam. Jazakallah for having me. Hello, everyone.
Yes, and to you, Sister Fazlin Fransman-Taliep. Assalamu alaikum to you, and wonderful you're able to join us.
Walaikum salam.
Yes, Paul, let's start off with you. And obviously, we've looked at this topic, and in fact, we're calling it the global political dynamics in Palestine, and a whole host of issues that we want to obviously discuss this evening, and also taking a look at South Africa as well, where we've just come out of an election. Palestine became a major talking point with a number of parties. We're going to see that in the United States of America. We've seen it in Britain. We see it in many parts around the world. So one cannot ignore the Palestinian question. And these are dynamics that are playing out. And we've also seen now with the Chinese reconciliation initiative. So right across the entire world, what is taking place in Palestine, what is happening in Palestine is of interest to the entire world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the 7th of October 2023 was a watershed point that suddenly brought the question of Palestine, the liberation of Palestine, the aspirations of the people of Palestine back onto center stage after there was an attempt to marginalize them. And it's clearly something that is very topical and intensely contested in our own country. on both sides, actually.
Yes, Paul. Dr. Farhin, yes, just to get your thoughts as well, and just to get in a brief overview as an introduction in terms of how you see these dynamics playing out. And we know that October the 7th has actually changed the world, and Palestine will be changing the world. And this is the reason why we are here today, to look at this impact right across the entire globe.
Yes, I think there was a consistent, deafening silence around the Palestinian cause for many, many years, up until the point that October 7th happened. And now the world is definitely talking about Palestinian human rights, their occupation, their besiegement of Gaza, the illegal separation wall or the apartheid wall that is in the West Bank. I think more and more people have now come out in support for Palestinian liberation and the movement towards justice and peace for all people, and that people want to reject Zionism as a whole. The most beautiful thing that I have seen with regards to this entire movement is seeing young Jewish individuals come out and dismiss what Israel is doing and conveniently say that Israel does not speak for the world Jewry. I believe it was just yesterday that organizations like Jewish Voices for Peace, If Not Now, came out and held a protest and a sit-in where many of them were arrested. I think this has also shown the world that definitely Jewish community are also aligned to the teachings of their faith. They believe in collective liberation and peace for everybody, not just for one community.
You can pause that. And Fazlin, let's get an introduction from you.
Yeah, so I think this has been an interesting year just within the context of elections that have been taking place across the board. So in South Africa as well as in countries around the world. And if we use, sort of the UK election as a litmus test of governments that had, pro-Israel policies that came out, quite vehemently in support of the Israeli government, and kind of, that obviously that's not the only factor in elections. And I think that is something that we have to always be very conscious of. But I think what we've seen is a global movement by people to say that, the status quo cannot exist anymore. We obviously have seen it in South Africa, but on a different level, but specifically globally on the Palestinian issue. We've seen obviously marches in Western countries, which historically there have always been protests, for pro-Palestine, but I don't think in the magnitude that we've seen over the last year. And I think that is a sentiment that every single politician that is standing in election needs to be aware of. Obviously, there are other factors, but I think definitely foreign policy and the fact that a genocide is happening as we speak is something that definitely is in the minds of progressive voters.
Well, Fazlin, there's a lot that for us to actually think about and to explore further. Especially when you're talking about foreign policy as well. But Paul, just coming back to you, and for want of a better term, I've got 4 subheadings that we will be focusing on, and we're going to visit each one individually. And all of this, at the end of the day, is about the Palestinian cause. But let's just start off by talking about the Palestinians themselves. We've seen the latest initiative on the part of China trying to reconcile the 2 Palestinian factions. And for a very, very long time, we've seen this between Fatah and Hamas, and also going back to when elections were held. And Hamas obviously is a legitimate government of Palestine, not recognized by the world. We've seen Mahmoud Abbas, we've seen Fatah, the recognition, particularly coming from the West, from the United States of America as well, and the disunity, for want of a better term, has to an extent harmed the Palestinian cause. And let us just talk about this initiative. How important is it for Palestinians to unite? Especially at a critical moment like this, especially at a time when both Gaza and the West Bank and other areas of occupied Palestine are facing untold hardship, untold brutality, and this genocide that is unfolding.
Is that question addressed to me initially?
Yes, Paul, in fact,
Okay.
and I will ask Dr. Farhin and
Sure.
Fazlin to comment as well.
Excuse me. I think the unity is such a critical factor. United one is a force is far stronger than divided. But clearly, what is also critical and important is the principles on which that unity is based. And I think there is maybe a chasm between the Palestinian Authority, which is not, I think, identical to Fatah, but nevertheless is the dominant force playing its sort of rapprochement subcontractor role to the Israeli security state, and Hamas, which does not play that role and in fact rejects the very idea of a ethno-Jewish state. So I think, ideologically, there's a chasm, and there could be strategic moves towards strategic or tactical unity, but I would imagine that there's going to have to be a change within the forces that are part of the PA, and I'm not really somebody who knows a lot about the dynamics of Fatah within the PA and what forces within Fatah are aligned with a more Hamas position. I would imagine Mr. Barghouti, who's in jail, who's a Fatah person, is probably very close to them, and they have actually demanded his release. But possibly my other colleagues are more au fait with some of those dynamics. But that's where I would start looking for the likelihood or the prospects of a authentic type of unity.
Thank you for that, Paul. Dr. Farhin, it is clear and the facts are there where Israel has actually ruled out a role for Hamas or Fatah in governing Gaza even after the end of these hostilities. They've made the statement over and over again. And we've seen these rival Palestinian factions. We've seen Hamas and Fatah, and now China and playing a more diplomatic role in getting both parties to sign this declaration, to agree to form even a national reconciliation government. And we're talking about a government of national unity, in South Africa. But it is clear that although Hamas and Fatah have in principle agreed, uh, from the outside and from where we are, we've seen this fractured relationship, what it has actually done in terms of the Palestinian cause. And there were many initiatives in the past, whether we're talking about Camp David, all of these that were negotiated with Fatah in the past that did not come to fruition. And I suppose, uppermost in the minds of an ordinary Palestinian, and where does his loyalty actually lie? What does he want? So this is not only about Fatah and Hamas, it is about people, it is about the average Palestinian, it is about their lives, it is about them who have been suffering through this ugly and this brutal era of apartheid that have been perpetrated against the Palestinians.
Right. So the unity government is intended to oversee Gaza as well as the West Bank. It's to manage reconstruction and also, I believe, to prepare for elections and so on. Although there wasn't really a timeline given for its formation, and that really wasn't set there. However, the agreement also highlights that China is growing in its influence in the Middle East and the regional politics there in the Middle East. It's also brokered a deal between Saudi and Iran. So these factions that are reconciling in terms of talks, which began, I believe, in April, shows that China has achieved a lot in terms of Middle Eastern politics. Now, Palestinian factions that include Hamas and Fatah agreed to form an interim national unity government during the talks in Beijing that concluded yesterday. And this Beijing declaration that was signed involved about 14 factions, which aimed to address about 17 years of division between Hamas and Fatah, which also hampered the rights of Palestinians and political progress in terms of the two-state solution and the ability for the Palestinians to also have the right to self-determination and so on. So this agreement does come amid international efforts to broker a ceasefire deal for Gaza. And we also see senior Hamas officials who are supporting this unity government and so on in terms of managing Palestinian affairs and also counter external pressures. But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has opposed any role of Hamas when it comes to governing Gaza. And Israel's Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz criticized Fatah's engagement with Hamas. He actually went ahead and went on to Twitter or X and criticized Mahmoud Abbas embracing murderers and so on, and he was referring to Hamas by that. So we can see that Israel has conveniently played out this idea that it does not accept a two-state solution. This was always the idea from the get-go. It doesn't take more than 56 years to allow another group their right to self-determination and the ability to govern themselves. If we look at the 1967 agreement for the two-state solution, no two-state has transpired for the Palestinian people, and the occupation has lasted for so long. So we see that China has played a huge role. This is something that's very commendable, something that Arab nations were also not able to do. And we see in the background that BRICS nations are also now playing a big role in Middle Eastern politics. And I think this is where the future will go.
Well, definitely, Dr. Farhin. And as you mentioned, China's efforts must be commended. And I'm sure, Fazlin, you would agree with that because as Dr. Farhin spoke about, not even Middle East countries, not even Western countries, this is the first time we're seeing an initiative of this sort because it is going to obviously pave the way for any major obstacles between the two factions. But at the same time, as Dr. Farhin says, Israel has actually vowed to destroy Hamas, saying that it will end the war. They've already dismissed this Beijing declaration, and this is how far it has gone. And as Dr. Farhin alluded to as well, the criticism that has been leveled against Mahmoud Abbas. Now, putting all of that into context, it is clear that China wants to see peace. China wants to see stability, and stability in each and every way, because it has got major influence, not only in the Middle East, but in right across the entire world. And what the West has failed to do in all these years of the occupation, China obviously has taken a very, very positive role, a very, very positive step.
I 100% agree. And I kind of want to dovetail on what Dr. Farhin had said, just with regards to the role of China and the US. The US has historically had hegemony with regards to the Israeli-Palestinian issue in terms of negotiations. And they've always been the main kind of partner that would, have these conferences or summits, etc. And I think the fact that China is leading this process, but I think one of the key things that came from the Chinese foreign minister, I think is very poignant, which marks a shift from the way the US used to handle these types of negotiations was that they said that this is an internal Palestinian issue, and it is something that we are merely facilitating, but it is something that they need to work out themselves. So I think the beauty of this particular agreement, it is that China didn't necessarily go in there with a spreadsheet of saying these are the things that we want, which is very typical of historical kind of US type negotiations, specifically in the Middle East. And I think that's the first kind of break from the past. I think the second thing is, and this is very significant, is that Hamas has grown in popularity within the minds of the people, but it's still regarded as a terrorist organization by Western nations, which makes them being the legitimate government very, very difficult. So I think it is a very strategic move, just if you look at it from the lens of Hamas, to force Fatah and the other, sort of Palestinian organizations into an agreement, because then you make sure that you're having a discussion with Palestinians and that you can't pit Palestinians against each other, kind of by, circumnavigating Hamas. I think that's the one side. On the Fatah side and the PA, the general, sort of opinion with regard to the PA is that they don't have the same sense of popularity in the minds of people that support the Palestinian resistance. And that is obviously based on what has happened historically and the way they've governed. And I think Paul has alluded to that, being kind of, seconded by the Israeli government. And I think what this agreement does is it kind of puts a stopper whereby Israel or the US or anybody else can come in and kind of circumnavigate and put Palestinians against each other. And now we have a united front where Palestinians are saying, this is our government. If you want to negotiate with us, it forces them to negotiate with Hamas, which they've said they do not want to. And I think that is something that this agreement kind of enforces. And I think it's a good thing, because it speaks to the will of Palestinians rather than the different factions within Palestine.
Yes. Paul, just coming back to you as well. And I think what is important to understand is looking at the United States of America and the failure of the United States of America in this hegemonic leadership that it has assumed and adopted over a period of time. What we are seeing coming out of China is somewhat of a Chinese-led world order, for want of a better term. And we always said it, and I said it right at the beginning, in terms of Palestine is going to change the world. October 7th has changed the world already. And looking at this vision of this Chinese-led world order for Palestine, but also at the same time in terms of global consequences, because this is actually going to build up and lead up to the United States elections, where Palestine is going to be a hot topic. We're going to be talking about Kamala Harris as well. So just your thoughts in terms of this American leadership, the American world order, the Western-led world order versus this Chinese vision of this Chinese-led world order.
Well, I think we have a transition sort of happening, in terms of global geopolitics, where unipolarity, which was what we entered into after the end of the Soviet Union, has now reached its peak, and it is on the decline militarily, politically, and economically. So, powers like Russia and China speak quite openly and explicitly about a multipolar world. And the incorporation of these extra countries into BRICS is an example of them practicing that. And so I think what it means for the Middle East and for Israel as the regional hegemon there is that they're becoming extremely limited in what they can do, not just economically and politically, but also militarily. And if you look at the Iranian drone attack on Israel, staged, managed, I understand, between the US and Iran, in order to make it a demonstration rather than a all-out sort of catastrophe for a whole lot of people in Israel. I think it's a very good example of the limits of Israeli power. And, in that, and in this moment, there are clearly spaces opening up for Palestinian movements. The horror is that Palestinian people are being killed on a scale never witnessed before. A much bigger scale than the Nakba, actually, if you start adding up the numbers. So there's incredible destruction and suffering that's going on, but the geopolitical reality and the reality of power of Palestinian forces, organized Palestinian forces, particularly I think Hamas in this case. There's clearly space that has opened up there. And I think just to end off on that point, I think what's very important for the opening up of that space for formations like Hamas and probably also for the BDS sort of national committee, or the BDS world movement with its sort of base in Ramallah, is that there are in the region, there are forces that are openly supporting the Palestinians militarily, in this case from Yemen, the Houthis, and there are others, and of course Hezbollah. And behind Hezbollah, this takes us then back into the regional geopolitics and ultimately the global geopolitics. Behind Hezbollah stands Iran, and behind Iran stands Russia. So the limits are not just on Israeli military maneuverability and power, but also on the US. So I think, yes, we're at the peak of this unipolarity. There are all sorts of opportunities that have opened up. The spark and the instrument that created the crisis to push us here was the 7th of October. And what followed in this terrible genocide and destruction has made it even more difficult for Israel and its Western supporters to implement their agenda. I suppose it's part of the tragedy of history about how many people who are, relatively speaking, innocent suffer, and in this case die, as this moment opens up.
Yes, Paul. Dr. Farhin, just talking about unipolarity and looking at the world, it is clear that the global south, to a large extent, have rallied behind China. The global north, obviously, behind the United States of America. And looking at how this actually translates into the cause for Palestine and the support for Palestine, looking at the global north versus the global south. And you've got two big players. On the one hand, you've got the United States of America, and China is another player. In fact, it's a dominant player in the world from an economic perspective as well. And it wields huge influence, huge power. And just to understand how this would actually translate for the Palestinian cause against this Chinese initiative as well.
Right. So China is definitely becoming a world power in terms of manufacturing and so on. And we always see this tug and pull with the United States and China. I think if Trump were to be president, it would be no different. He definitely does see China as a threat for the United States' global domination. I believe the US has also fractured itself in terms of its so-called democracy, human rights, its run for justice, liberty, and freedom for all people because of its foreign policy towards Israel. The United States politicians as well are very much corrupted. by donors such as AIPAC, by other Zionist organizations and federations that have been meddling in US political affairs. And this year alone, I believe $100 million dollars were secured to influence US politics and so on. We saw, I believe it was Jamal Bowman, if I'm not mistaken, who actually lost his election because so much of money was put against him with a pro-Israel candidate. So certainly, US cannot play the watchdog of the world. It doesn't symbolize democracy any longer. And we see this on the world scale now, especially with all of these ICJ hearings and Security Council resolutions that the US has continuously vetoed. I'm not sure if it was 80 or so vetoes that US has used over the years, and I believe 50 plus were used in favor of Israel. So it is quite shocking who US really stands for. Do they stand for the American public, or do they really stand for the Israeli government? Years ago, I believe in the 1980s or so, Joe Biden came out and said that if there wasn't an Israel, the United States would have to create or invent an Israel so that it could secure its political interests in the Middle East. And we can see that since the US has meddled in Middle Eastern affairs, what it has done to that region. It has completely devastated it. It has killed and murdered countless civilians, and it has not stopped. So whether we want to look at it from the US perspective, the global South is basically majority pro-Palestinian, in my opinion. And the world economy is also with the global South. So naturally, it would pivot towards the opinion of the global South. We see Benjamin Netanyahu, despite of this ICC arrest warrant that has been the news that has been circulating, that the ICC will soon issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu to put pressure on Israel. Despite Netanyahu dismissing allegations against him and so on, we can see that he's still been invited to speak to the US Congress and so on. And today is actually his speech. I was actually looking at a video a few minutes ago where protesters were booing him and calling him a child killer. So we see this global shift around the world, and we also see it within the US population as well, especially the youngsters who are below 35. They are conveniently supporting the Palestinian cause. With regards to Netanyahu arriving in Washington on Monday with his wife, he was greeted by the press and certain US officials as well. And today he is going to address the US Congress for the fourth time. This is the most that a foreign minister or a prime minister has addressed the US Congress. He's also set to meet with President Joe Biden, followed by Kamala Harris, and I believe Trump as well. Trump actually posted on X that he looks forward to meeting Netanyahu, whilst he shared a letter from Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority regarding his assassination attempt. So there is all of that speculation going on around, including the recent stepping down of Biden from the presidential race, which basically leaves the door open for Trump. And Trump is also a staunch supporter of Israel. Recently, he also used the word Palestinian as a slur. He called Joe Biden a bad Palestinian. So we see that in terms of US politics, there is not much hope for the US. So the power needs to move to the global South, and the pressure from the global South to put this occupation and brutality to an end.
Yes, Dr. Farhin. In fact, this discussion is built up so beautifully to the next aspect that we want to talk about, and about the U.S. elections, about Kamala Harris assuming, she takes the presidency as well. So I think, you've articulated it so well. And what we're going to do is we're going to go for an ad break. We come back and we will then continue with our panelists. And Fazlin, just, for you, just to think about while we are talking, is just to think about what Dr. Farhin has just said with regard to the U.S. And we will be talking about Kamala Harris, because I think it's a foregone conclusion that possibly Joe Biden may be history, and looking at Kamala Harris, some reports say that she's created some distance from Biden on Gaza, and her opinions on Gaza, emphasizing on Palestinian suffering. But all of that to think about. We come back, and I'm sure we will have a much more detailed discussion.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, buckies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name. Valley's Motor Spares.
Kids these days are smart, and when you're competing for their attention against their smartphones, you need to make smart choices, like using Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil in every meal you make. It's naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether you're cooking, frying, or baking, you get the great tasting results that'll get their attention faster than the latest app. And if that doesn't work, change the Wi-Fi password. Sunfoil. Now we're cooking.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists, with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities, conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041-583-6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
The people of Palestine need your support now. Africa Muslims Agency is on the ground, already providing food, medication, and emergency supplies in Gaza. Donate any amount to Heal Palestine at africamuslimsagency.co.za. Africa Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Yasin Badat Financial Advisory. Are your financial goals feeling out of reach? Yasin Badat Financial Advisory is here to turn your aspirations into achievements. Our dedicated team, armed with a history of success, is ready to guide you through the complex nature of financial and investment planning. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to the game, our personalized solutions cater to your unique goals and risk appetite. Trust in our commitment to transparency, integrity, and excellence. Ready to unlock a world of financial freedom? Partner with us today. Call Yasin Badat Financial Advisory at +27 33 346 2071 or visit www.yasinbadat.com. Yasin Badat Financial Advisory, guiding you to financial success.
Are you planning a wedding, birthday party, corporate event, or any special occasion? Kani's Catering Services got you covered. Our catering services are here to elevate your event to unforgettable heights. From tantalizing appetizers to mouth-watering main courses and desserts, our culinary creations are crafted with passion and precision to delight your guests' taste buds. Our spit braai is a talk of the town. Indulge in succulent, tender meats, slow roasted to perfection over an open flame. Kane's Catering Services chefs bring creativity and expertise to every dish they prepare, ensuring that each bite is a culinary masterpiece. We take care of your guests while you relax and enjoy every moment of your function. Whether it's plated meals to a simple buffet, we are on top of it all. Ready to start planning your perfect event? Get in touch with us today to discuss your catering needs and request a personalized quote. Let us take your event to the next level with our exceptional catering services. Kane's Catering Services, situated at number 373 Jabundlovu Street, Pietermaritzburg. Call now 033 342 3511 or email us on info@kanees.co.za for Pietermaritzburg and surrounding areas only. Visit www.kanees.co.za.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Well, we continue with our panel discussion this evening, taking a look at the global political dynamics on Palestine. And we have been unpacking the Chinese reconciliation initiative between the two Palestinian factions, Fatah and Hamas, but also taking a look at some of the other global consequences or reactions to the Palestinian question. And one of them is going to be the elections in the United States of America, as has been the case in many other parts around the world. And looking at the political dynamics playing out in the United States of America, Joe Biden almost out, and on the other hand, you've got somebody like Donald Trump, but also looking at the successor to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Now, the question that is being asked is Kamala Harris the answer, or is she not? Because we know she has got a fair amount of history as far as her her interaction with as Dr. Farhin spoke about, even due to meet Benjamin Netanyahu, but also at the same time the Jewish lobby in the United States of America, IPAC as well. She's addressed them over and over again, and now she comes across as a humanitarian, emphasizing on the Palestinian suffering, and at the same time ambitious enough to become the president of the United States of America. Fazlin, Fransman, let's talk about Kamala Harris, this impression that she is giving, a humanitarian, caring, and all along, while this genocide was unfolding, she is the deputy to Joe Biden. What did Kamala Harris really do?
So I think it's firstly important to perhaps highlight that by the time that Kamala Harris became the vice president of the US, she was actually a very inexperienced politician. She had obviously been a prosecutor and an attorney general, but she was a one-term, not even a full-term senator. And so her experience with regards to international politics is very, very limited. So this notion that Kamala Harris could be this panacea to the Palestinians generally, but to the conflict in particular, I think is a bit of a misnomer. I think we can only really judge that based on who she chooses as her running mate or her vice presidential candidate. And it's important here to look at history. So over the last 20 years, what has happened is if the president is weak on foreign policy, usually the vice president becomes strong on foreign policy. So for example, if we look at George Bush, the junior, the second one, George W. Bush, if we look at him, Dick Cheney was chosen to be a counterweight with regards to foreign policy. If we look at Barack Obama, Joe Biden was chosen as a counterweight with regards to foreign policy. Now, Kamala Harris, despite serving obviously as VP and doing quite a number and obviously replacing Joe Biden in the latter part of the terms for a lot of the foreign sort of engagements, she still is very inexperienced in this space. And so it might be, and she has said this, she has tweeted, sort of sympathy for Palestinian casualties. However, we must be very clear that she spoke at her first APAC conference in 2017, whereby she stated very unequivocally her support for Israel and promoting that support. And she has not reneged on that. So that is, I think, one of the key things. Secondly, she has, even in her sort of humanitarian position towards Palestinians, which she has stated publicly, she still obviously puts a portion of the blame on Palestinians for their own suffering. And I think we must not be naive, because we did this in 2009 with the election of Barack Obama. There was this hype and this, sort of sense of excitement about the prospect about how Obama might mean for the Palestinians. And he won a Nobel Peace Prize and then did nothing for the Palestinians. So I think it's very important to realize that foreign policy with regards to the Middle East, whether it's Democrat or Republican, is not very different. And I think that is, kind of something we just need to accept as a people. I think the very fact that China has stepped up, and this is where, China's role is becoming more dominant in the world. The fact that China has stepped up is because America has lost the moral authority. And I don't think they will gain it with Kamala Harris, just in terms of her election. However, I do think, though, that she will probably want to play a big role in solving this crisis. I think that was Obama's vision when he became president. He had this whole big mantra about, that's why he made his Cairo speech, because he believed that he could be the person that solves the Middle East crisis. I think Kamala Harris is bold enough to have that viewpoint, specifically also because she has ties to the Jewish community, and that's something that we mustn't discount. We don't necessarily know what that ties mean in terms of whether or not it's a Zionist position or an anti-Zionist position, but I do think she is bold enough to have this belief that she could be a mediator or play a role in ending the genocide. And this again comes back full circle towards this whole Hamas-Fatah, because any sort of engagement with the Palestinians will now force us again to have Hamas at the table, and any sort of leader will need to concede that is the reality, because Palestinians have decided this is how we're going to kind of negotiate going forward. But I do not, to reiterate, think that she is the panacea for the Palestinian challenge that we're facing at the moment. One last point on this I want to say is that she's missing today's sitting with Netanyahu as the vice president, right? And there was a lot of hoo-ha in the pro-Palestinian quarters being made about this. But my feeling is that this is more a scheduling issue, because she's scheduled to speak at a university, a sorority club. And so that's one aspect. And I think also there's a deliberate PR play here, where she's not going to take an outward stance, but she's going to, give the impression that she's not being hard on the Israeli side. But I think that's more optics than it is actual substance.
Yes, Paul, also, just, from your understanding as well, we all know the power of the Zionist lobbies in the United States of America, and also in determining the outcome and who leads America, who leads the United States of America. And we've seen many a president in the past being subservient to the whims and fancies of Israel. And the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu is now in the United States of America, he will be meeting Kamala Harris. And it's going to be interesting to see in terms of her strategy and the outcome of her meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu in terms of what that is actually going to reveal. But also at the same time, she is in a position where she needs to strike a balance, because we know since October the 7th, the Democrats in particular have lost huge amounts of support from many sections of American societies. We're talking of peace-loving Jews. We're talking of American Muslims. We're talking of many, many communities right across the United States of America. And could this possibly be in striking a balance for her to try and win back perhaps even Arab Americans, Muslims, many progressive people who said that they would not support Joe Biden, who said that they would not support Donald Trump?
Well, just listening to what you were saying, I was struck by the thought that everything that you are saying is premised on the assumption that Kamala is going to win the presidency. There's a very, very good chance that it's too late for a Democrat to win the presidency, and that Trump, some people would argue that Trump is a shoo-in already. Some of these issues are therefore a bit sort of well, not pointless. I think the question is interesting, but I would sort of come at this issue by looking at the limits to U.S. Hegemony, particularly militarily, and the fact that the U.S. is facing a military defeat of Ukraine by Russia, that its entire strategy economically also in Russia has not worked. The fact that it's getting bellicose in the South China Sea against another major military power, China in this case. And now there's this third attempt by Netanyahu and his government to drag the US into another war, that I think there are signs that they have realized that there are limits, and that they've tried, as I said, with the Iranian drone sort of attacks, that they've tried to try and control this tiger that they've got in Israel. And I think there's a lot of weakness on the Democrats. I think they're in disarray. I think their whole sitting with Biden when he was clearly not compos mentis enough to even be the current president is a sign of that in the sort of party controlling the White House. On the Trump side and all of that, I think he's very bellicose against China. He did things on the Russian side, pulling out of the INF treaty, that completely undermined the idea that he and Putin, are as thick as thieves. I don't think Trump has a plan. I think he's a deal maker. He doesn't have an ideology, and what he's going to do, is a bit of a wild card. And I think it just brings me to another point, which never gets raised in the mainstream media, and I find it also interesting that it also apparently never gets raised in the alternative media, which is the risk of a regional war and even a third world war, and obviously there are risks there that it would escalate to nuclear, which is the most extreme immediate existential threat that we all face. And this uncertainty in the US, their inability to think straight and to have a plan on either side, Republican or Democrat, is a very, very great risk, as opposed to the leadership in China and Russia, who seem to be the adults in the room, on an issue of the end of civilization. So it's very difficult to know, what's going to happen until the election is over and there's a bit of clarity as to who's in charge. And leading into the election, if the Democrats lose, and if it's clear they're going to lose, are they going to divert by attacking Russia more openly or not? So we are in a very, very uncertain and I think a dangerous moment. And I know I'm talking much bigger now than Palestine and the Middle East, but it affects all of us, and so it affects Palestine and the Middle East also. But as far as China and Russia are concerned, I'm unaware of them having a position on Palestine, that the Palestinians have been facing settler colonialism for the better part of the last sort of 100 years. I'm unaware of them using the term apartheid very, very, very sort of frequently. And so if we come through all of this into a different world, I think we need to ask what type of Palestinian scenario or status quo is going to exist, and in relationship, say, to Russian and Chinese and BRICS elites. What are they going to do? Are we going to face a similar situation to what has developed in our own country, where so many people are marginalized, that we have our own sort of crisis here? So those are the thoughts in my mind.
Yes, Dr. Farhin, Paul seems to think obviously it's a foregone conclusion that Donald Trump obviously will be victorious and be the next president of the United States of America. But I just want to come back closer to home now. Having just come out of our own elections, and we've seen now with the cabinet, obviously, Ronald Lamola, the new Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. And interestingly, the Jewish Report quoted an interview in one of his first media interviews in South Africa, and that was with Salam Media, where they did a comparison of Ronald Lamola to Dr. Naledi Pandor. Now, we know in the build-up to the elections how Dr. Naledi Pandor extensively had campaigned on the Palestinian ticket in the more predominantly Muslim areas, for want of a better term, but also at the same time looking at Ronald Lamola, and for some reason or the other, this article that featured in the Jewish Report thinks that he may have a more softening approach, where on the other hand, Ronald Lamola made it clear in the interview at Salam Media, saying that, and I quote, we believe this ICJ case will be the beginning of the end of Israel's impunity. And this is what he said in the interview. But the Jewish Report obviously thinks otherwise, and they feel that he may possibly lean more to the United States of America.
Look, with Minister Lamola, there is this consistency, at least, that we are witnessing, because with former Minister Naledi Pandor, he was also playing a role with the ICJ case that we had submitted. So he was the Minister of Justice back then, and I believe it was in February this year that the South African Jewish Board of Deputies also held a little picket or a protest outside of the department. And there is this notion that he is also being smeared, just like Minister Naledi Pandor, as an anti-Semite and so on. But nonetheless, we are seeing that there is this transfer of power into a hand that was also responsible for the ICJ case that we had submitted. Now, South Africa has praised this advisory opinion that was issued by the ICJ that declared Israel's presence in the occupied Palestinian territories as unlawful, and it needs to bring it to an end. And apart from that, it also demanded that Israel cease all of these new settlement activities, evacuate its settlers, and also make reparations for the damages in the OPTs. And it therefore brings to the point that all of the signatories to the United Nations, it brings them under an obligation that they put pressure on Israel to stop its unlawful actions. And with regards to Minister Lamola, who is now the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, he hailed this ruling as something that is groundbreaking. And he also underscored the fact that occupier cannot claim self-defense whilst also violating international law, as Israel conveniently does. And he also emphasized the significance of the ICJ's findings, that it is violating the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination and so on. And yes, you had quoted right about him as well. He also mentioned that the international community must act to end the occupation, as well as the gross violations of human rights laws and so on that are being perpetrated by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people. And that we as the world nations must oblige by this. Now, in contrast, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has certainly called this ruling a bunch of lies. Asserting that the Jewish people, the Israelis, are not occupiers in their own land. The Palestinian Solidarity Campaign here in South Africa warned that if there is a failure to legally and diplomatically push Israel, then this would mean that it is basically held unaccountable. It has impunity and it can further carry out crimes against humanity. And the United States as well will not say anything against this. So there must be a certain amount of pressure that is pushed on Israel, or put on Israel rather. We also look at how the ICJ scrutinized Israel's resident permit policy for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, as well as movement restrictions in the occupied territory and the demolition of Palestinian properties in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. I believe around 11,000 structures have been demolished up until now since 2009. And this is just violations that are structural in that sense. So this is very unfortunate that we are seeing. Let's just quickly look at some of the violations that were found by the ICJ, the transfer of settlers into the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which violates Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, the expansion of the settlements, which violates Articles 46, 52, and 55 of the Hague Regulations, as well as diverting natural resources from the occupied territory for its own use. This has been effectively covered by Amnesty International's article titled "The Occupation of Water," which Israel really hampers from the Palestinians. It's also expanding Israel's illegal regulations into the West Bank and imposing Israeli law in East Jerusalem that is against Article 43 of the Hague Regulations, forcefully displacing, evicting Palestinians, demolishing their homes, restricting their movements, as well as violence that settlers have caused against Palestinians, which brings about huge security concerns. So all of this is becoming a huge issue that I think a lot of Zionist, pro-Zionist organizations and the United States have consistently failed to stop Israel from doing. In my opinion, I want to go back to Kamala Harris. I don't really think that she might play that of an effective role when it comes to attempting to stop Israel in doing such, because she has been a recipient of a large amount of AIPAC funding over the years. Unfortunately, that is the circumstance, and we might not see anything different when it comes to US foreign politics, especially in relation to Israel. I mean, a lot of pro-Palestinian voices would love to see somebody like Jill Stein, who is being a vocal supporter of Palestinian rights. She wants to remove AIPAC funding from US politics and so on, but this is only a person's dream that somebody like her can be voted in. Unfortunately, the US so-called political democracy landscape does not allow for that. So we are left with somebody like Trump, who I must remind the viewers that under Trump's presidency, the US embassy was moved to Jerusalem, declaring the city as an Israeli territory, which also led to huge amounts of protests where Israeli troops killed about 58 Palestinians and injuring over 2,700. So it was under his presidency that this happened. So he is no better, although there wasn't any war that happened under Trump's presidency. This is really what happened to the Palestinians, and I don't think it will be any different in this context either.
Yes, thank you for that, Dr. Farhin. Just before we get to you, Fazlin, we're going to play out that clip. I think it's important for the viewers. The comments that were made by Minister Ronald Lamola during that interview on Salam Media.
You come from a very, very strong legal background. So let's look at the ICJ case. Will this continue to be pursued with the same energy and be seen through to completion? Will South Africa request additional interim measures if Israel, not if Israel intensifies genocide? They have in fact intensified the genocide, and they have in fact defied the court as well. What is your stance, and how do you believe we, South Africa, should move forward on this very, very heinous situation playing out on the Palestinian people?
Yes, as we are aware, the case was predicated on our genocide convention, which has been domesticated in our own parliament. It's a South African law. As a country, we had a duty to act to protect the rights of the people of Gaza, in particular Palestine, which we have done. So we will continue to explore all the measures at the UN level and also at the ICJ, if need be, to ensure that the rights of self-determination, humanitarian access, and the cessation of fire by the state of Israel is realized. So if we have to do it through UN resolutions, and we support the US initiated resolution at the UN for cessation of fire, the current dialogue that is happening at Qatar, we support, because we believe that any dialogue or platform that is aimed to cease fire in Palestine or in Gaza currently should be supported. So we will definitely continue to explore all the avenues to continue to put the necessary pressure to the state of Israel to cease fire and to allow for humanitarian aid in Gaza.
Yes, Fazlin, just against what you've heard the Minister of International Relations saying, and also I think looking at the approach, and the Jewish Report is hoping that Lamola may bring a fresh approach to South Africa's foreign policy. And the key issue here is we've got a very different government. We've got a government of national unity. We've got conflicting or contrasting ideologies within that government. With the likes of the DA, we know the PA as well have made their position very, very clear as far as Palestinians are concerned. On the other hand, you've got the likes of the ANC. Now, taking all of that into account, in how is this actually likely to impact or influence South Africa's foreign policy within this government of national unity?
So I think there's two aspects perhaps to focus on. I think one, there was a lot of criticism towards the ANC leading up to and in the election period around whether or not they were using the Palestinian issue as a electioneering tactic. And I think what Minister Ronald Lamola clarified was that they are going to see the case to its completion, which I think is something that, irrespective of political affiliation, is something that we need to be proud of and kind of take some sort of hope from that. But obviously now, under this administration, the ICJ case was something that started in the previous administration. The question we need to now ask is, what additional things are South Africa, or is the South African government going to do in terms of its engagement with regards to on the Palestinian issue? And that's one aspect. And then its subsequent engagement with those powers that are supporting the genocide in Gaza. And I think it's a catch-22 situation, because we do have a government of national unity, but we also within the ANC have a contestation on the how to deal with the Palestinian issue. And a very practical example is in the previous administration, we saw Parliament voting for the permanent closing and expelling of the Israeli ambassador and the embassy, and that was never ratified by cabinet. It still hasn't been ratified by cabinet. So the question really is, for example, the embassy could silently open and the ambassador could silently return, and we would not be none the wiser, because there wasn't a formal position by the executive of our government with regards to that. So I think that's the first thing, and this is something we then need to push. And push the executive to implement, because Parliament has taken that position. I think the second thing, it's perhaps a good thing for us in terms of the pro-Palestinian kind of general lobby in South Africa, is that there were parties within the GNU that requested positions within DIRCO, and it was not given. And I think that should be a mechanism to silence critics with regards to whether or not the government's policy will change. And because obviously otherwise you would have competing ideologies just in terms of how we would navigate the DIRCO space. I also think just to speak about the minister in and of itself, I think people are looking at the fact that he's quite young. That's definitely something that both the analysts and the South African Jewish Board of Deputies were kind of latching on. He's kind of young and therefore impressionable. But what they don't realize is that Ronald Lamola came through the ANC Youth League of Julius Malema. He was the deputy president in Julius Malema's second term. He was the deputy president that was expelled from the ANC Youth League. Probably at the time, in this current era, the most radical ANC Youth League that we've seen in many years. And so being part of that kind of political education, I think, grounds one in a certain ideology. And I think we must never negate that. So while, Minister Ronald Lamola is definitely somebody that's very diplomatic, and I think will do an excellent job in navigating the kind of geopolitics of BRICS and the USA. And I think this notion that we need to soften a position to the USA is quite problematic, and it actually doesn't speak to our foreign policy. Our foreign policy speaks, or DIRCO's foreign policy speaks to the fact that we will operate out of our national interest. And so we will engage with America on trade on ABC 1, 2, 3 as it is relevant to our country. But that might be separate from how we engage on the issue of Gaza and Palestine and all of those type of things. And I think obviously there is a quarter in South African kind of political sort of circles that is pushing for a complete kind of rejection of this global north, but specifically an American kind of influence in Africa. And I want to kind of dovetail into what both of the other panelists said with regards to Donald Trump. And again, this speaks to Minister Ronald Lamola. So under Trump's presidency, his way of engaging with Africa, if you look at the document that they put out, US engagement, with Africa, was all about combating China's influence in Africa. It wasn't about Africa in and of itself and its own issues or problems, or kind of working on that kind of relationship. So that's something important to remember. But in the context also of the US elections, just to kind of bring that in, I think this Trump presidency, or possibly presidency, is going to be one that is very different, because one of the fathers of the Abraham Accords was Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. Jared will no longer be, or won't be, part of a second term. He has stated that emphatically. Steve Bannon, who was kind of a key architect of Trump's campaign and was very critical in actually, running the strategy on how Trump got elected, is also obviously not part of that. The entire machinery of the Trump campaign has changed. And on this instance, I do agree with Paul in that Trump is a pragmatist in a way. He's a deal maker, he's a pragmatist, he is not an ideologue. Where Democrats, I think, and traditional Republicans are ideologues, they are invested in particular, ideologies. And I think this is where, this notion that, and it even speaks to the ego of Trump to solve the Palestinian, Israeli-Palestinian issue. And even his tweet, that he tweeted out was, I think, kind of very sarcastic and a bit of a slap in the face for Netanyahu, because why are you tweeting, I'm excited to meet with you on the one hand, and then you're tweeting a letter from Mahmoud Abbas. It's a catch-22 situation, and it's a bit of a game that is being played. So there is an uncertainty, because obviously, and I think Dr. Farhin spoke about it, is that he was the president that made or that recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which is obviously problematic. But I also think that he doesn't have the ideologues in his camp, the ideologues that are quite heavy on the Israeli side vis-a-vis 8 years ago. So I think there might be a change just with regards to that. And I think even then, its engagement, or our engagement with South Africa, or America's engagement with South Africa, will also possibly be slightly different within that space.
Yes, which brings me, Paul, to the whole question surrounding South Africans serving in the Israeli army. Now, in the interview that Ronald Lamola had on Salam Media, he spoke about it, and he spoke about pursuing South Africans serving in the Israeli army. He spoke about a process that will be guided by law enforcement. He spoke about if such evidence exists and such people were identified, anyone who has that evidence must bring it to the attention of the police. They should be investigated, and the NPA can then prosecute. So let's get to this. And I know you also sent out a picture where you outlined this entire process of recruitment. Attorney Ziad Patel, whom you've worked with very, very closely in actually building this case. So, Paul, let's talk about this.
Well, it's interesting what you're reporting, what Minister Lamola said, okay, because the ANC's and the NPA's and the SAP's consistent record has been to stall for, I think it's 15 years now, because the first attempts to make South African volunteers to the IDF accountable for violating certain local laws and latterly certain domesticated international laws under the Statute of Rome, and also now under the Genocide Convention, has been just to stall. And I've been involved in this only for the last 7 years, but 7 years of fairly intense research where I've been privy to the submissions, the charges that were made, and helped produce documents. Prima facie evidence is there. It's all over social media. You find this evidence and you screenshot it, because the people who pick up that you are looking at them take it off their social media. But there's lots of it. It's been submitted to the authorities. The first submissions were made about 10 years ago on a particular case in 2014, following so-called Operation Protective Edge, which was the genocidal attack on Gaza in 2014. Further submissions with further evidence was made on a reworked charge sheet, and to the credit of the National Director of Public Prosecutions, they overrode a Western Cape decision to not pursue the initial charges, allegedly because there wasn't sufficient evidence. In these cases, as citizens, citizen activists, you are presenting prima facie evidence to the authorities as a basic argument that they should then use the resources of the state to do the research that we can't do, because we don't have access to telecommunications and other forms of evidence, and we can't subpoena someone to be interviewed. So that is a very troubling stalling. And, you know, it's been going on right until this moment that we speak, because we've now got about close on 25 suspects who are South African citizens and have participated or still participate in the IDF. And the authorities are at best talking and assuring us. The diagram that you've put up there is it shows, based on research that started with the Muslim Lawyers Association in 2009, 2010, and other research that we did, and we sort of plotted. It shows the recruitment process, and it includes some marketing or advertising by organizations like, sorry, this isn't the best graphic that I sent through. I realize it's not as clear as it should be, but you look at SARL on the left side and TELFED, those organizations that are in the interface of putting out the communication. And then there's an application that can go online, or it can go, you walk into offices. There are 4 or 5 offices of SARL in various provinces in South Africa, and you apply to the IDF. I think it's called Machal. And if you get approved, you go to an intermediate destination, step 3, on your South African passport, and then from there you go on your Israeli passport or travel document to the final destination. And so when you come back, you know, you can hide that fact. The significance of that graphic that we've just looked at is that there are a network of institutions. I mentioned 2 of them, but there are others also. I mean, the recruitment and the advertising happens that we have anecdotal evidence about IDF officials visiting Herzliya School in Cape Town and King David in Joburg to talk to people in matric or the grade before matric who are approaching, you know, the end of the school career, about going on Aliyah to Israel and doing their bit, you know, their patriotic bit. So there's a network of institutions. It's not just 24 people. You don't do it unless there's an institutional framework that enables the thing to happen, supports you while you're there. And the more you look into the networks, both here and in Israel, what strikes you is the detail and the way these networks have been set up and how prolific they are all over the world. It's not just South Africa, and so the problem with organizations that in the network is that they are racketeering in terms of the Prevention of Organized Crime Act. They are consistently committing a felony. It's not a once-off. So that's another violation which we have submitted for investigation. But the point of this whole story, I think we should come back to Mr. Lamola and, you know, what we can expect from him and what we can expect from the ANC. I think what this sort of stalling tells us, I think 2 things. On the one hand, and I've looked at the ANC's position or lack of position, I'm talking about historically now, going back to the 1950s really, on Palestine and what happened there. And, you know, what strikes you, and also Mr. Mandela's statements when he came out and he went to the US, what strikes you there is the problem starts in 1967. Zionism is a legitimate national liberation movement, and there needs to be a 2-state solution. And there's no sense at all of the Nakba and of settler colonialism. And then you see practices where, while talking for Palestine, the ANC is clearly walking with Israel. If you go to the World Conference Against Racism in 2001, the NGO forum there, and I heard this from Zionists who were doing an evaluation of this 20 years later. They had them on the ropes. They suffered such a fright and a defeat at that conference. And who helped to pull the irons out of the fire at the governmental session? None other than Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as the foreign minister under Mbeki. And later on, you'll remember in the 2008 caste-led genocidal attack when her deputy Fatima Hajig spoke in Lenasia and said certain things about old Jewish money in Europe, protecting Israel from criticism. She was attacked as an anti-Semite, and she was hauled over the coals and forced to apologize publicly by Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma and Motlanthe was then acting president. So I think there's a very superficial understanding historically in the ANC. I think there's an opportunism there, and I think it's good that they're reacting the way they have with the ICJ, but I think it's been in response to pressure around the world, and also pressure within the country. I think there's a strong movement in the country, and I think we need to focus on BDS and ask the government and the ANC, why isn't there boycott? Why isn't there support for divestment? Why isn't there legislation that puts this in place, like the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act in the US in the 1980s, given that you've seen genocide there? I mean, how much more terrible, inhumane stuff, must one tolerate before you actually put the pressure on? It needs to go beyond the ICJ and all of that. So those are, I think, the important sort of PowerPoints we have in the country. We have ourselves, and we have our media like Sada Media and Muslim Views and other media that is not mainstream, but that plays, I think, quite a critical role in bringing these voices out. And I think it's very important, that you have hosted this, and not just tonight, but including tonight's discussion about such important and critical issues.
Well, thank you very much for that, Paul. Much appreciated. And I see we are obviously running out of time. We've got about 5 minutes, Dr. Farhin. We'll go around the panelists just to gather some final thoughts, but also on this whole question surrounding the criminal complaint. And I must say, Advocate Ziad Patel has done a tremendous job. I believe 500 pages of evidence that has been presented. Sadly, 15 years ago, those dockets were still lying with the NPA. And again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. It's left to see whether action will be taken, whether these dossiers will be opened in the first place. And I know the MRN obviously has also been at the forefront of supporting this initiative.
Yes, certainly. So I really would like to speak to the BDS movement and so on for my closing bit. I think with regards to the ICJ ruling, this needs to be enforced by UN member nations. They must now step up. They need to apply diplomatic pressures through sanctions. They need to halt trade with Israel, close embassies, freeze financial transactions, and also increase the boycotts. As Paul mentioned with the BDS movement, it can now play a crucial role in this effort. The door is open for the BDS movement around the world. It can urge its various governments to act swiftly to disrupt Israel's apartheid regime, economically, socially, culturally, however way we can find. Now, in the context of South Africa's apartheid as well, we had 4 pillars, which was mass mobilization, underground cells, armed operations, and also international solidarity through BDS, which basically fractured the sustenance of the apartheid regime here in South Africa. And that is what the international community through the BDS movement needs to do. And Israel needs to be rendered unsustainable in its current form. The BDS has the power to do that. So once corporations, governments, and nations, if they start turning their backs on apartheid, it will create enough pressure to sort of enforce this change that the world community has been hoping to achieve. The one thing that I am looking forward to right now, as soon as we drop, is actually listening to Benjamin Netanyahu's address and the consistent lies that he has been playing. I mean, the most famous ones are Israel wants peace. Israel is acting on behalf of all Jews around the world. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and so on. So these are some of the regular talking points that I'm looking forward to hearing once again in Netanyahu's address.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Farhin. And Fazlin, finally, from you in my home, the ladies have the final word. So I'll give you the honor. If you could unmute your mic, please, Fazlin.
Yeah. I think just with regards to South Africa and our foreign policy, I think it's very important for us to evolve away and out and move further than the ICJ case. And in terms of, what Paul was presenting is such an important talking point, and there really just hasn't been political will to deal with that. And I think that's something that we need to own, just with regards to just the broader solidarity from a governmental perspective. Also, I mean, one of the things, if you speak to officials within DIRCO, unofficially, they'll tell you, and when you tell them that we need to stop trading with Israel, why are we still trading with Israel? Why is there still all these relations that are taking place? They'll tell you that we can't do it because of, all of these myriad of reasons. And so there's the official position in terms of what they say out in public, what they say in interviews. And I do think that there is some genuineness within that. But there's a whole array of other things that can and should be done that I don't think that there is a political will to deal with it because of the backlash that we might receive just with regards to that. I think I want to end off just on the American elections and just kind of touch on the fact that I think we're going to be entering into a very interesting period in global politics. I think historically we have looked to the United States just globally to be the the humanitarian watchdog of the world. It's still today why we're having this discussion, because they still have so much power to play and role to play in facilitating a peaceful solutions. Like if there was to be one political power or government that actually could hold Israel accountable and could actually make meaningful difference, it is the United States, in terms of actually cutting off funding or literally saying we're not supporting you. And I think that would isolate Israel. And so the United States is still a relevant discussion, despite obviously the fact that we are entering a multipolar world. But I do think we need to realize the fact that the US's role within this situation is important, and therefore our international relations, we have to be very balanced, because we want to make sure that the powers that can actually have soft and hard diplomacy strategies, that they actually utilize that in a good way. And so it will be very interesting in the next 3 to 4 months to be able to what is the outcome, to see what is the policy positions that are going to be outlined by the candidates. And I think then you'll see a rise up, hopefully, from the American public, the public that has been so critical of the Biden presidency, and really to just say we're either voting for a third candidate, Joel Stein was mentioned, or a different candidate.
Yes, I think we have lost Fazlin for some reason or the other, possibly network issues, bandwidth issues as well. But I think it's important. These are very interesting times that we are living in. And to all the panelists this evening, Dr. Farhin, Delawala, Paul Hendler, and also to Fazlin, Fransman-Taliep, we thank you, and we do appreciate you taking time out. And I think it's been most absorbing, actually. I've actually been a riveting discussion, really, as I sit here hosting the show. But it's just wonderful that we're able to unpack so much in the last hour and a half. And we thank both of you. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
Shalom
salam.
Aleichem. Thank you very much.
Yes, and also to Fazlin-Taliep, sadly, she obviously lost connection, but we thank her as well. And with that comes to the end of another edition of Talk to Unite Wadi on this Wednesday evening. Looking forward to a lot more going forward. But for now, from myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.